ArcGIS Pro is the premier application for data management, mapping and spatial analysis. It's a 64-bit, multi-threaded application with a friendly new interface which is context sensitive. The project pane is where everything belongs in your projects. Maps and scenes, databases, toolboxes and folder connections are all organized here. Layers are contextual, so when you select a layer, the user gets presented with functionality only as you need it. These tabs make it easier to configure layer properties like definition queries, labeling, and symbology. Currently, I have all earthquakes that occurred during the month of November 2016 in my map. These earthquakes include the magnitude 7.8 event, which caused considerable damage to the East Coast as well as its aftershocks. Exploratory analysis is easier with ArcGIS Pro's smart mapping capability. I'm going to get started in exploring this data by using an unclassed renderer to symbolize my data by the magnitude field. As I adjust the interactive histogram slider, I get immediate visual feedback on my map. Because of the vast number of aftershocks in this data set, the map's looking very busy. Right now I'm using color as a primary variable, but with ArcGIS Pro we can vary the symbology by more than one attribute. By using up to 3 additional fields in our data set, we can adjust transparency, rotation, and size. I want to focus my map on large earthquakes shallower than 20 kilometers. I'm going to use transparency to represent the depth of our earthquake data. I'm also going to adjust the level of transparency. And by ramping up our slider, we can focus our earthquakes in on the earthquakes which were shallower than 20 kilometers. It's also a good idea to use size to represent magnitude. By enabling size ranges, we can again interactively alter the quantitative data in that field. And the result is a map that places emphasis on large magnitude earthquakes shallower than 20 kilometers. We've also got a temporal element. In the Time tab, we can define settings to animate our data using the Time slider. ArcGIS Pro now also includes charting visualizations which complement our map. By creating a scatter plot of my earthquakes, we can explore the relationship between time relative to the initial 7.8 earthquake and magnitude of our earthquakes. This chart shows us the aftershock pattern over time, and we can already see the pattern sequence of aftershocks emerging. After we add the trend line, we can better see that the earthquake magnitude decreases by 20% over each day after the main earthquake. This chart is connected to my map. It maintains the map symbology and colors, and with dynamic selection I can highlight and identify features of interest. ArcGIS Pro supports great mapping in 2D, but also in 3D as well. Animations were added in the last edition of ArcGIS Pro, which made it easier for you to create a fly-through of your data. By adding your bookmarks to the timeline, you can make an interactive fly-through. This time we've added the ability to create overlays in your animations, including titles and dynamic content like camera positions. For data like my earthquakes, the scene viewer supports subsurface visualizations too. These animations can be exported to a bunch of preset video formats, including Instagram, so you can share them easily with your audience. ArcGIS Pro is the best application to work with local data sources, but it's designed to be a connected desktop application. This means that you can work directly with services from ArcGIS Online, so I can access content from ArcGIS or share content back to ArcGIS for other users to explore. In the project pane, I can access folders and groups of items that have been shared to me by my colleagues, and even access content from the Living Atlas. My favourite content in the Living Atlas is the swath of imagery available to me from the Landsat satellites, including up-to-date multispectral imagery, which in the case of my map is only up to a week old. This imagery is streaming to me as an image service, and by changing the band combinations, I can alter the appearance of this image, or because it's a raw image service, apply a processing template, which gives me quantitative data that I can use to enrich other datasets. Raster data, and specifically imagery, is a key capability to ArcGIS, and in 1.4, a core Imagery tab has been added. The Imagery tab has your most commonly used imagery workflows, including 2 new workflows for orthomapping and georeferencing. The georeferencing tools are brand new to Pro. They've been the most requested feature by ArcMap users who are currently migrating to ArcGIS Pro. To get started with georeferencing, we need to add a non-rectified image to our map. The first step is to add the image into our map. By zooming to the image, we'll be able to see that in fact this image has not been georeferenced, and we can obviously see it's not in the correct place. So let's fix that. We've moved away from the georeferencing toolbar experience we used to see in ArcMap and are now giving the user more of a workflow experience where we prepare, adjust, and review the image. The first thing I need to do is prepare the image. So I'll open the Locate pane and search for Thames, New Zealand. When I'm roughly in the anticipated place the image is located, I can fit the image to the display. To align the image properly, I can use a combination of the positioning tools. First, I need to rotate the image, then scale it, and then move the image into the correct place. It's not perfect yet, so step 2 is to adjust the image using control points. Adding control points can be a time-consuming task if you have not done this before. It's a process of selecting locations in the source imagery and then finding the matching location in the reference imagery. So that those reference locations are tied together. For large images like this one, you usually want to create as many GCPs as you can so that you can apply a good transformation to the image. If you already have ground control points captured, it is possible to import them and then apply a transformation to your image by importing control points from a text file and then applying the transformation to the image so that it's correctly positioned. So now we've got a properly rectified image. I'm working on a historical map here using this georeference imagery, and I'm using ArcGIS Pro's editing tools to digitize the building outlines. There are dozens of benefits to editing in ArcGIS Pro, but I want to show you some of the new improvements in 1.4, and first is the new reference grid. The reference grid is used as a basis for digitizing parallel or perpendicular lines and polygons, and once I turn it on I can set the origin and rotation for the grid. I'm currently digitizing these orthogonal school buildings, and we can set the reference grid to align with an existing digitized feature so that when I continue creating the rest of the buildings they'll all be properly aligned. So the origin for my grid is going to be this existing school building, and I'm going to align the grid with the wall of the building. So let's start creating a new feature for another one of these buildings. You'll notice that snapping is enabled, so I can begin creating vertices directly against the reference grid. And as I continue the polygon, each of the segments aligns itself parallel to the reference grid, even if I'm not in the grid itself. As I create the corners of the building, perfectly square right angles can be created, and it's especially important for when I create my final corner. As a GIS professional, I want to ensure the integrity of my spatial data, and the best way to do that is to use geodatabase topology, which we've made more improvements to in 1.4. The Error Inspector allows me to validate my topology and check for building overlaps in my feature class. We can zoom to each of the areas and use the Fix tool to view the topology rule that we've broken, and use the predefined fixes to fix the topological error. When it comes to analysis, you can find all you need in the Analysis tab. tools, geoprocessing history, and model builder. You can also access ready-to-use tools from ArcGIS Online. These are geoprocessing services you can just use instead of installing and licensing the additional software, which in some cases would be a premium extension like 3D Analyst or Network Analyst. So here's my problem. I've got the Marlborough Freedom camping locations, and I've got 2 people based in different Marlborough offices who I need to visit these locations and enforce council bylaws. I also need to give them a to-do list with estimated time of arrivals as well as other necessary information about the locations. So to do that, I'm going to use one of these ready-to-use services, the Solve Vehicle Routing Problem, in a model that I've developed. Essentially what this model does is it generates a list of destinations for each vehicle to be at certain times based on my input origins and destinations. Now there's a whole lot more going on in this model, including route optimization and sequencing, but before I go any further, I accept the fact that if I gave this model to someone to repeat with their own data, they wouldn't have a clue on where to start with it. This brings me to tasks, and I've configured a task to accompany my complicated model so that anyone using it will be guided through the workflow with specific instructions without any confusion. So in this task, first I am asked for the locations where my vehicles will start, which are my origins, and all the locations of where they need to go, my destinations. I can specify the start time of when the vehicles need to depart, and once I run the step, the Solve Vehicle Routing Problem will solve the problem for me and return ordered stops and routes. Because we have stops in sequence of visitation, which includes information about who visits each one and when they need to be there, we have enough information to use these locations as assignments in Workforce for ArcGIS. Remember, with ArcGIS Pro we can work with connected services, so I can copy those stops over to Workforce. All I must do is select my stops and my target data set, which are my Workforce assignments. Once I run this step, my features will be copied across as assigned features, and I can view these assignments in Workforce Dispatcher, and my field crews can view their own assignments on their mobile device. ArcGIS Pro is a great application for both mapping, vector and raster data, and a professional application for advanced editing and analysis. There's so much more to see in ArcGIS Pro, but if you haven't already started using it, ArcGIS Pro 1.4 is a great time to start.